Elena worked at a busy design company in the heart of Seattle. Every morning, she walked through the glass doors with her coffee in hand, ready to tackle another day of creating advertisements and marketing materials. Her co-workers knew her as the girl who always had a joke ready and never backed down from a challenge. The office was buzzing with excitement about the upcoming Halloween party. Everyone was talking about their costumes, and Elena was starting to feel the pressure. She wanted something unique, something that would make her stand out from the usual witches and vampires that always showed up at these events. That's when she remembered her old college friend David. He owned a small antique shop downtown, filled with the most amazing pieces from all over the world. Elena had always been fascinated by his stories about the items he collected. Some came from old estates, others from traveling merchants who dealt in rare and unusual objects. Elena decided to visit David's shop after work. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and she was immediately surrounded by the familiar scent of old wood and mystery. David looked up from behind the counter, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Elena, what brings you here today?" he asked, setting down the ancient book he'd been reading. "I need help with a Halloween costume," she explained. "Something different, something with a story behind it." David's eyes sparkled with interest. He loved nothing more than matching his pieces with the right people. "I have just the thing," he said, disappearing into the back room. When he returned, he was carrying a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was the most beautiful collar Elena had ever seen. It was made of silver that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Intricate patterns covered every inch of the metal, and small white stones were set into the design. "This is incredible," Elena whispered, reaching out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact with the silver, she felt a strange warmth spread through her hand. "Where did it come from?" David shrugged. "Estate sale last month." The previous owner was quite the collector. He had pieces from all over Europe, some dating back centuries. This one caught my eye because of the craftsmanship. "Look at these patterns. They're Celtic, I think. Very old style." Elena lifted the collar from its box. It was heavier than she expected, and the warmth seemed to pulse gently against her palms. "It's perfect for what I have in mind." "How much for you?" "Consider it a loan. Just bring it back in one piece after the party." Elena hugged her friend gratefully. As she walked back to her car, the collar safely tucked in her purse, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a costume piece. There was something about it that felt important. That evening, Elena tried on different outfit combinations with the collar. She finally settled on a simple black dress that would let the silver piece be the star of her look. When she fastened the collar around her neck, that same warm feeling spread through her body. For a moment, she felt dizzy, as if the room was spinning slightly. "Must be tired," she told herself, but deep down, she knew this feeling was different. The night of the Halloween party arrived, and Elena felt more confident than she had in months. The collar seemed to give her an extra boost of energy. She found herself laughing more easily, her jokes landing better than usual. Several coworkers complimented her unique costume choice, but as the night went on, Elena began to notice strange things. The music seemed louder than before, and she could pick out individual conversations even across the crowded room. The lights appeared brighter, and she found herself squinting more than usual. Most oddly, she could smell things with unusual clarity, the different perfumes people wore, the specific ingredients in the food, even the cleaning products used on the office floors. "Are you feeling okay?" asked her coworker Lisa, noticing Elena touching her forehead. "Yeah, just a bit overwhelmed, I think. This party is pretty intense." Elena decided to step outside for some fresh air. The cool October night felt amazing against her skin, and she took deep breaths of the crisp air. That's when she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows between two buildings, was a tall man, even from a distance. She could see he was watching her, not in a creepy way, but with an intensity that made her feel like he was looking for something specific. When Elena blinked and looked again, he was gone. She shook her head. wondering if she was seeing things. The combination of the strange sensations she'd been experiencing and the party atmosphere was probably playing tricks on her mind. Back inside, Eleanor tried to focus on having fun, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened tonight. The collar felt warm against her throat, almost like it was alive. Every now and then, she swore she could feel it pulse gently, in rhythm with her heartbeat. Meanwhile, miles away in a different part of the city, someone else was experiencing an equally confusing night. Kieran had been sitting in his study, reading reports from his security team, when suddenly he felt like he'd been struck by lightning. The sensation was impossible to describe. It was as if every cell in his body had suddenly woken up after a long sleep. His hands shook as he set down his papers, and his heart raced with an excitement he hadn't felt in decades. Something had changed, something important. Kieran walked to his window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, something was calling to him. He'd heard stories about this feeling from other members of his community, but he'd never experienced it himself. After so many years, he'd assumed it would never happen. But now, there was no denying it. The bond he'd heard about in old stories was real, and it was active. As Eleanor finally headed home from the party, she felt exhausted but strangely energized at the same time. The collar seemed to have become part of her somehow, and she realized she didn't want to take it off. Not yet. She fell asleep that night with vivid dreams of running through forests under the full moon, feeling more free and alive than she ever had before. In her dreams, she wasn't alone. There was someone running beside her, someone whose presence felt like coming home. When Eleanor woke up the next morning, she expected the strange feelings from the night before to have faded. Instead, they were stronger than ever. Her apartment seemed smaller somehow, and she found herself drawn to the window, looking out at the city with new eyes. The collar still rested against her throat, and she realized with a mixture of curiosity and concern that she couldn't remember how to take it off. It wasn't stuck exactly, but every time she reached for the clasp, her hands seemed to forget what they were doing. Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror and saw that her eyes seemed brighter, more alert. There was something different about her reflection, something she couldn't quite name. Little did she know that across the city, Kieran was preparing to find her. The pull he felt was getting stronger by the hour, and he knew that whatever had awakened the night before was just the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. The collar David had given her wasn't just a beautiful antique. It was the key to unlocking a world Eleanor never knew existed, and a connection that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. Kieran had lived for over 300 years, and in all that time, he had never felt anything like this. The sensation that hit him that Halloween night was so powerful it left him breathless. He sat in his large leather chair, trying to make sense of what was happening to his body and mind. As the leader of the Pacific Northwest Pack, Kieran was used to being in control. He made decisions that affected dozens of families, and people looked to him for guidance and protection. But right now, he felt like a young man experiencing his first crush, except 1,000 times more intense. The stories his grandmother used to tell him came flooding back. She had spoken of a connection so strong that it could change everything in an instant, a bond that would make two souls complete. Kieran had always thought these were just fairy tales meant to give hope to those who felt lonely, but this feeling was real. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to find the source of this connection. He could feel a pull, like an invisible thread connecting him to someone across the city. The need to follow that thread was almost overwhelming. For the first few days, Kieran tried to ignore it. He had responsibilities, meetings to attend, and packed business to handle. But the pull only grew stronger. He found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. During important discussions, his mind would wander, trying to figure out where this mysterious person might be. Finally, Kieran gave in to the urge. He began to follow the feeling, driving through the city streets at night, letting his instincts guide him. The pull led him to a quiet residential neighborhood, to an apartment building that looked perfectly ordinary from his car across the street. Kieran watched the building, He felt foolish, like someone following a map to buried treasure based on a dream. But the connection was undeniable. Someone in that building was calling to him. Whether they knew it or not, that's when he saw her. Elena stepped out of the building, and Kieran's world shifted. Even from a distance, he could see she was beautiful, but that wasn't what struck him most. It was the way she moved, the way she carried herself, and around her neck, glinting in the streetlight, was something that made his heart race: the collar she wore was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Kieran recognized it immediately from the old stories. It was a moonbond torque, an artifact his pack had thought lost forever. The sight of it explained everything and raised 1,000 new questions. Elena seemed completely unaware of being watched. She walked to her car with a slight frown, as if she was thinking about something troubling. Kieran noticed she moved differently than most humans, more gracefully, more aware of her surroundings. The collar was already starting to awaken something in her. Over the next few days, Kieran found himself returning to watch Elena's building. He told himself he was just trying to understand the situation. But the truth was he couldn't stay away. The pull was getting stronger, and he was starting to feel protective of this woman he'd never even met. Elena, meanwhile, was struggling with changes she couldn't explain. She had called in sick to work, something she never did, because she felt like she was coming down with the strangest illness. Her senses were becoming incredibly sharp. She could hear conversations from apartments above and below hers. The smell of food from the restaurant down the street was so strong it made her feel sick. Sleep was becoming impossible. Every night, she had the same vivid dreams of running through forests. In these dreams, she felt more alive and free than she ever had in waking life. But when she woke up, she felt trapped in her small apartment, like a wild animal in a cage. The collar had become part of her routine. She never took it off, partly because she loved how it looked, but mostly because every time she tried to remove it, she felt anxious and incomplete. It was as if the piece of jewelry had become part of her identity. One morning, Elena decided she needed to get out of her apartment. The walls were closing in, and she felt like she might go crazy if she stayed inside any longer. She walked to her favorite coffee shop, hoping that being around people would help her feel normal again. The coffee shop was busy, filled with the usual morning crowd of office workers and students. Elena ordered her usual drink and found a small table by the window. She was trying to read a book, but her mind kept wandering to the strange dreams and the changes she was experiencing. That's when she felt it, a presence so strong it made her look up from her book immediately. Standing at the counter, ordering coffee, was the most striking man she had ever seen. He was tall with dark hair and an air of quiet confidence. But what caught her attention wasn't his appearance, it was the way her body reacted to seeing him. Her heart started racing, and she felt the collar around her neck grow warm. The man seemed to sense her staring. He turned, and their eyes met across the crowded coffee shop. The moment their gazes connected, Elena felt like the world had stopped spinning. Everything else in the room seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them looking at each other. Kieran felt the same shock of recognition. This was her. This was the woman who had been calling to him without knowing it. Up close, he could see the collar more clearly, and he noticed the way it seemed to pulse with a soft light. More importantly, he could see the confusion and slight fear in her eyes. Without really thinking about it, Kieran walked over to her table. Elena watched him approach, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the coffee shop could hear it. "Excuse me," Kieran said, his voice gentle but confident. "I couldn't help but notice your necklace. It's quite unique." Elena's hand went instinctively to the collar. "Thank you. It was a gift from a friend. May I sit?" Kieran asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something about this man that made her feel safe and nervous at the same time. When he sat down, she noticed he had the most unusual eyes. They seemed to hold depths of knowledge and experience. "I'm Kieran," he said, extending his hand. "Elena," she replied, shaking his hand. The moment their skin touched, She felt a jolt of electricity run through her entire body. From the way Kieran's eyes widened slightly, she knew he felt it too. That's a beautiful name, Kieran said, not letting go of her hand immediately. Elena, I know this might sound strange, but I think we need to talk about your necklace and about some things you might have been experiencing lately. Elena pulled her hand back, suddenly wary. What do you mean? Have you been having unusual dreams? Feeling different than normal? Your senses becoming sharper? Elena's eyes widened. How could this stranger know about the changes she'd been experiencing? Who are you? I'm someone who can help you understand what's happening to you, Kieran said carefully. But first, I need to know, where did you get that collar? Elena's mind was racing. This man knew something about what was happening to her. Part of her wanted to get up and run, but a larger part was desperate for answers. My friend David gave it to me for Halloween, she said slowly. He owns an antique shop. Said it came from an estate sale. Kieran nodded, as if this information confirmed something he already suspected. Elena, what I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. That collar you're wearing, it's not just an antique. It's something very special, and it's connected both of us in ways you can't imagine. Elena stared at him, her mind trying to process what he was saying. Connected us how? That's a long story, Kieran said, his voice soft and patient. But I promise you, I'm here to help. You don't have to go through these changes alone. For the first time since putting on the collar, Elena felt like she might finally get some answers. But she also sensed that once she heard what Kieran had to say, her life would never be the same again. Elena stared at Kieran across the small coffee shop table, her mind spinning with questions. The way he spoke about the collar, the way he seemed to know exactly what she was going through, it was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. I think we should go somewhere more private to talk, Kieran said gently. What I need to tell you isn't something we can discuss here. Elena hesitated. Every logical part of her brain was screaming not to go anywhere with this stranger. But there was something about Kieran that made her feel safe, even though she couldn't explain why. There's a park a few blocks away, she said finally. We can talk there. They walked to the park in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Elena kept glancing at Kieran, trying to figure out who he was and how he knew so much about what was happening to her. Kieran, meanwhile, was trying to find the right words to explain a world that most people didn't even know existed. They found a quiet bench under a large oak tree. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow. Around them, Elena sat down, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for answers that she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Elena, Kieran began, his voice calm and steady. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to keep an open mind. Okay, Elena said, though her voice was shaky. That collar you're wearing, it's called a moon bond. Torque. It's an ancient artifact that was created hundreds of years ago by people who understood magic in ways we've mostly forgotten today. Elena's hand went to her throat, touching the warm silver. Magic? You're talking about magic. I know how it sounds, Kieran said. But think about what you've been experiencing. The dreams, the way your senses have changed, the way you felt when you first put on the collar. That's all real, Elena, and it's just the beginning. Elena stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away from the bench. This is crazy. You're talking about magic like it's real, like it's something that actually exists in the world. It does exist, Kieran said quietly, and so do the people who use it, people like me. Elena turned to face him, her eyes wide. What do you mean? People like you? Kieran took a deep breath. This was the moment he'd been dreading. Elena, I'm not entirely human. I'm what people call a werewolf. The words hung in the air between them. Elena felt like the ground had disappeared from under her feet. She laughed, but it was a nervous, disbelieving sound. A werewolf? Like in the movies? With the full moon and the howling? Not exactly like in the movies, Kieran said. But yes, I can change my form. I'm part of a community of people who live alongside humans, but separately. We have our own rules, our own way of life. Elena sat back down heavily on the bench. This is insane. You're telling me that werewolves are real, and you're one of them? I am. And Elena, the collar you're wearing, it's connected us. When you put it on, it created a bond between us. That's why you've been having those dreams, why your senses are changing. The collar is awakening something in you. Awakening what? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. You have shapeshifter blood in your family. Line, it's been sleeping for generations, but the collar has brought it to the surface. You're becoming something more than human, Elena. Elena felt dizzy. She put her head in her hands, trying to process everything Kieran was telling her. This can't be real. This can't be happening to me. I know it's a lot to take in. Kieran said softly, but I'm here to help you through it. You don't have to face this alone. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since this conversation started, she saw something in his eyes that made her pause. It wasn't just kindness, it was understanding, as if he knew exactly what she was going through. Why should I believe you? She asked out without saying a word. Kieran stood up and walked a few steps away from her. He looked around to make sure no one else was nearby, then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Elena watched in amazement as Kieran began to change. His hands grew longer, his nails becoming sharp claws. His face shifted slightly, becoming more angular, more wild. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer brown but golden, like a wild animal's. Oh my God, Elena whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Kieran changed back to his human form, the transformation happening so smoothly it was like watching water flow. Now do you believe me? Elena couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes wide with shock and wonder. The collar you're wearing, Kieran continued, sitting back down beside her. It's not just any magical artifact. It's designed to find perfect matches, people who are meant to be together. When you put it on, it connected us because we're meant to be mates. Mates? Elena's voice cracked on the word. It's like being married, but deeper. It's a connection of souls, not just a legal contract. The collar recognized that we belong together, and it created a bond between us. Elena stood up again, anger suddenly flaring in her chest. You mean this thing made me feel attracted to you? It forced me to have feelings I didn't choose. No, Kieran said quickly. The collar doesn't create feelings. It reveals connections that already exist. What you feel for me, what I feel for you, that's real. The collar just made it possible for us to find each other. But I never agreed to this. Elena said, her voice rising. I never chose to be bonded to anyone. I put on what I thought was a costume piece. And now you're telling me I'm magically tied to a stranger? You're right, Kieran said, standing to face her. You didn't choose this, and I'm sorry for that. If I could change how it happened, I would. But Elena, the bond exists now. We have to decide what to do about it. Elena reached up to the collar, trying to find the clasp. Then I'll just take it off. Problem solved, Elena. Wait, Kieran started to say, but she was already struggling with the collar. No matter how hard she tried, Elena couldn't find a way to remove it. The clasp seemed to have disappeared. The collar felt like it was part of her skin, warm and alive against her throat. I can't get it off, she said, panic creeping into her voice. Why can't I get it off? Because the bond is complete, Kieran said sadly. Once the collar recognizes a true match, it can't be removed easily. It would require a special ritual, and it's dangerous. It could hurt both of us. Elena sank back onto the bench, feeling overwhelmed. So I'm stuck? I'm stuck with this thing forever, and I'm stuck connected to you. You're not stuck, Kieran said, sitting beside her but keeping some distance. The collar creates a bond. But what we do with that bond is up to us. We can choose to embrace it, or we can choose to fight it. But Elena, fighting it will make both of us miserable. I need time. Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think about all of this. Of course, Kieran said, take all the time you need. But Elena, there's something else you need to know. The changes you're experiencing, they're not going to stop. You're becoming something new, something powerful. And there are others out there who might see you as a threat. Elena looked at him with tired eyes. What do you mean? You're not just changing into any shapeshifter. You're becoming something rare, something special. And that means you're going to need protection while you learn to control your new abilities. Protection from what? From people who would hurt you to get to me. From those who fear what you're becoming. Elena, I know this is a lot to ask, but I need you to let me help keep you safe. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring at the collar and her reflection in a nearby puddle. Finally, she looked back at Kieran. I don't know if I can trust you, she said honestly. But I don't think I have much choice, do I? You always have a choice. Kieran replied, but I hope you'll choose to let me help you, because Elena, bond or no bond, I care about what happens to you. As they sat together on that park bench, both of them knew that Elena's old life was over. The question now was what kind of new life she would choose to build. Over the next few weeks, Elena's life became something she never could have imagined. The changes in her body were happening faster now, and every day brought something new. She could hear conversations from 3 blocks away, smell emotions on people like perfume, and see in the dark as clearly as in daylight. Kieran had been patient with her, giving her space while still checking in every day. He would text her simple messages asking how she was feeling, or leave small gifts outside her apartment door, books about meditation, herbal teas that help with the headaches, and once, a beautiful dream catcher that somehow made her sleep more peaceful. Elena found herself looking forward to these small gestures. Even though she was still angry about the whole situation, she was beginning to understand that Kieran wasn't the enemy here. He was just as caught up in this strange turn of events as she was. One morning, Elena woke up feeling different again. But this time, the change was bigger than anything she'd experienced before. She looked in the bathroom mirror and gasped. Her eyes, which had always been brown, were now a striking silver color. They seemed to glow with their own inner light. She called Kieran immediately. My eyes, she said as soon as he picked up. They're silver now. That's good, Kieran said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. That means your true form is almost ready to emerge, Elena. You're not becoming just any shapeshifter. You're becoming something very rare, a silver wolf. What does that mean? It means you're going to be incredibly powerful. Silver wolves are legends among our kind. They're said to have abilities that can heal others and bring peace to conflicts. Elena, you're becoming something amazing. Elena stared at herself in the mirror, trying to process this information. I don't feel amazing. I feel scared and confused. I know, Kieran said gently. But Elena, I need to see you today. There are things happening that you need to know about. They met at the same park where Kieran had first told her the truth. But this time, he looked worried. His usual calm confidence was replaced by something that looked like concern. What's wrong? Elena asked as soon as she saw him. There are others who know about you now, Kieran said without preamble. Others who know about the collar and what you're becoming. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of others? Vampires, Kieran said simply. Specifically, an old vampire named Victor who has been hunting for the Moonbond Torque for decades. He believes that if he can control the collar and the person wearing it, he can gain power over werewolf packs. Control me? Elena's voice was sharp with anger. I'm not some object to be controlled. I know that, and you know that. But Victor doesn't see it that way. To him, you're a means to an end. And Elena, he's dangerous, very dangerous, as if to prove Kieran's point. Elena suddenly felt like she was being watched. She turned around and saw 3 people standing at the edge of the park. They looked normal enough, but something about them made her skin crawl. Don't look directly at them, Kieran said quietly. Those are Victor's people. They've been following you for days. Elena's heart started racing. Following me? Why didn't you tell me? Because I was hoping they would lose interest and move on. But it looks like Victor is more determined than I thought. One of the watchers started walking toward them. Elena noticed that he moved strangely, too smoothly, like he was gliding rather than walking. We need to leave, Kieran said, standing up now. But before they could move, the man was standing right in front of them. Up close, Elena could see that his skin was too pale, his eyes too bright, and when he smiled, his teeth were too sharp. Elena, the man said, and his voice was like silk and ice. Victor would very much like to meet you. She's not interested. Kieran said, stepping between Elena and the vampire. The vampire laughed, a sound that made Elena's skin crawl. I wasn't asking. What happened next was so fast that Elena could barely follow it. The vampire lunged at Kieran, moving faster than anything human could move, but Kieran was ready. He began to change, his human form shifting into something larger and more powerful. Elena watched in amazement as Kieran transformed into a massive wolf with dark fur and golden eyes. He met the vampire's attack head-on, the two supernatural beings locked in combat that was both beautiful and terrifying. But there were two other vampires, and they were heading straight for Elena. Elena felt the collar around her neck grow warm, then hot. Suddenly, something inside her seemed to wake up. Without knowing how she knew what to do, Elena closed her eyes and let the change happen. The transformation was unlike anything she could have imagined. One moment she was human. The next she was something else entirely. She opened her eyes and found herself looking at the world from a different perspective. She was lower to the ground, and everything looked different, sharper, clearer, more alive. She looked down at herself and saw silver fur, so bright it almost seemed to glow. She was a wolf, but not like Kieran, where his wolf form was large and powerful. Hers was graceful and ethereal, like moonlight given shape. The two vampires who had been approaching her suddenly stopped. They looked at each other with what Elena realized was fear. Impossible. One of them whispered, "A silver wolf. They're just legends." Elena felt power flowing through her body, but it wasn't the kind of power she expected. It wasn't violent or aggressive. Instead, it felt like healing, like peace, like the ability to make things right. Acting on instinct, Elena approached the vampire who was fighting with Kieran. She didn't attack him. Instead, she simply touched him with her paw. The effect was immediate. The vampire let out a scream and stumbled backward, where Elena had touched him. His skin began to glow with silver light. The vampire looked at his arm in horror, then at Elena. "What did you do to me?" he demanded. Elena didn't know how to answer. She wasn't even sure what she had done. But somehow, she had changed something fundamental about the vampire. The evil aura that had surrounded him was gone, replaced by something that felt almost human. The other two vampires backed away slowly. "This isn't over," one of them said. "Victor will not be denied." They disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Elena and Kieran alone in the park. Elena changed back to her human form, the transformation happening as naturally as breathing. She looked at her hands, amazed that just moments before they had been silver paws. "That was incredible," Kieran said, changing back to his human form as well. "Elena, what you just did, I've never seen anything like it." "What did I do?" Elena asked. "I touched him, and he screamed." "I think you purified him," Kieran said, his voice full of wonder. "You took away the darkness that made him a vampire." "Elena, you didn't just fight him off, you healed him." Elena looked at the spot where the vampires had been standing. "Is that what silver wolves do? Heal people, according to the legends?" "Yes, but Elena, those were just stories. No one alive has ever seen a real silver wolf. You're the first in centuries." Elena felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Just weeks ago, she was a normal person with a normal job and normal problems. Now she was some kind of legendary creature, with powers she didn't understand. "This is too much," she said, sitting down heavily on the park bench. "I didn't ask for any of this." Kieran sat beside her, careful to give her space, but close enough to offer comfort. "I know. But Elena, what you can do, it's amazing. You have the power to heal, to bring peace, to make things better. That's a gift. It doesn't feel like a gift," Elena said. "It feels like a responsibility I never wanted." "You don't have to carry it alone," Kieran said softly. "I'm here. My pack is here. We'll help you learn to control your abilities, to understand what you can do." Elena looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Those vampires, they're going to come back, aren't they?" "Probably. But next time, we'll be ready for them." As they walked back toward Elena's apartment, she realized that her old life really was over. There was no going back to being just human. But maybe, with Karen's help, she could figure out how to be something more. The weeks following Elena's first transformation were like living in a completely different world. Karen had introduced her to his pack, a group of people who welcomed her with warmth and curiosity. They treated her like she was something special, something precious, and it took time for Elena to get used to that kind of attention. Elena learned that being a silver wolf meant more than just having unusual abilities. She was a bridge between different supernatural communities, someone who could bring peace where there had been conflict. But with that gift came responsibility, and Elena wasn't sure she was ready for it. The collar had changed too. Instead of the pulsing uncertainty it had shown before, it now glowed with a steady, warm light. Elena had grown to love the way it felt against her skin. Like a constant reminder that she was connected to something bigger than herself, Karen had been patient throughout her learning process, never pushing her to make decisions about their bond before she was ready. He taught her how to control her transformations, how to use her healing abilities safely, and most importantly, how to protect herself. But Elena knew she couldn't put off the big decision forever. The bond between them was real, and it was affecting both of their lives. She could feel Karen's emotions sometimes, sense his presence even when he was miles away. And she knew he could feel her the same way. One evening, as Elena was practicing her transformation in the secluded area behind Karen's house, she made her decision. She found Karen in his study, reading reports from pack members about supernatural activity in the area. He looked up when she entered, and she could see the hope and fear in his eyes. "We need to talk," Elena said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Karen set down his papers and gave her his full attention. "Of course, I've been thinking about everything, the collar, the bond, what it means for both of us," Elena began, "and I've realized something important." "What's that?" "I was angry about not having a choice in the beginning. I felt like the collar had forced this connection on us, and that made me feel powerless." Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I've come to understand that the collar didn't create anything that wasn't already there. It just made it possible for us to find each other." Karen nodded, not wanting to interrupt. "What I feel for you," Elena continued, "the connection we have, it's real. It's not just magic or destiny or whatever else people want to call it. It's real feelings between two real people." "Elena," Karen said softly, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I choose this. I choose you. Not because of the collar, not because I have to, but because I want to." The relief and joy on Karen's face was unmistakable. But Elena held up a hand. "But I have conditions," she said. "I'm not going to be some traditional mate who follows your lead and stays in the background. If we're going to do this, we're going to be equals, partners in everything, of course." Karen said immediately, "Elena, I would never want you to be anything other than who you are. Your strength, your independence, that's part of what makes you amazing." Elena smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good. Because I have some ideas about how we can use my abilities to help both the supernatural and human communities." Over the next few days, Elena and Karen worked together to plan their future. Elena wanted to continue living in both worlds, keeping her job and her human friendships, while also embracing her role in the supernatural community. But their plans were interrupted when Victor himself finally made his move. Elena was walking home from work when she felt the familiar chill that meant vampires were nearby. But this time, it wasn't just a few of Victor's followers. This time, it was Victor himself. Along with a dozen other vampires, they surrounded her on a quiet street, and Elena realized she was in serious danger. These weren't the confused, relatively weak vampires she had encountered before. These were old, powerful, and very angry. "Elena," Victor said, his voice smooth as silk, "at last we meet properly." Victor was tall and elegant, with silver hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the street light, but his eyes were cold and calculating, and Elena could sense the centuries of darkness that surrounded him. "What do you want?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I want what's mine, Victor replied. That collar belongs to me. I've been searching for it for 50 years. It's not yours, Elena said firmly. It chose me. Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Chose you? My dear. You have no idea what that collar really is, do you? It's not some romantic artifact designed to find true love. It's a weapon, a way to control shapeshifters. Elena felt the collar grow warm against her throat. You're wrong. Am I? Let me show you what that pretty little necklace can really do. Victor raised his hand, and Elena felt a pulling sensation, as if something was trying to drag her forward. The collar grew hot, then cold, then hot again. But instead of being controlled, Elena felt her own power rising. The silver wolf inside her was angry, protective, and ready to fight. Elena transformed right there on the street, not caring who might see. Her silver fur gleamed in the darkness, and she felt more powerful than she ever had before. Victor's smile faltered when he saw her true form. Impossible. Silver wolves are extinct. Elena didn't waste time talking. She leaped forward, not to attack Victor, but to touch him, just as she had done with his follower in the park. But Victor was older and stronger than the other vampire. When Elena's palm made contact with his arm, instead of being purified, he screamed and threw her backward with supernatural strength. Elena hit the ground hard but rolled to her feet immediately. She could feel blood on her side where she had hit the pavement, but the collar was glowing brighter than ever. That's when Kieran arrived. He came running down the street in his wolf form, followed by a dozen other pack members. Elena had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. The battle that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever imagined. Werewolves and vampires fought with supernatural speed and strength, while Elena tried to use her abilities to help her allies and heal the wounded. But the tide didn't turn until Elena realized something important. Her power wasn't just about healing individuals. It was about bringing balance to entire situations. Elena stood in the center of the fighting and let her silver light expand outward, touching everyone within a block radius. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The vampires who were touched by her light didn't scream or fight back. Instead, they stopped fighting entirely. The darkness that had driven them for centuries was washed away, leaving them confused but no longer evil. Victor himself was the last to be affected. When Elena's light reached him, he looked at her with something that might have been respect. Clever girl, he said. You've ruined everything I've worked for. I've given you a chance to be something better, Elena replied, changing back to her human form. Victor looked at his hands, then at his followers who were all looking around as if waking up from a long dream. What have you done to us? I've given you back your humanity, Elena said. What you do with it is up to you. Victor and his former followers left without another word, walking away like people who had suddenly remembered they had somewhere important to be. Elena collapsed from exhaustion, but Kieran was there to catch her. That was incredible, he said, holding her close. Elena, you just ended a conflict that has been going on for decades. I'm tired, Elena said, leaning against his chest, but I'm happy. This feels right, Kieran, using these abilities to help people, being with you, it all feels right. 3 months later, Elena and Kieran had their mating ceremony. It was held in the forest where Elena had first learned to control her transformations. With both pack members and Elena's human friends in attendance, David, her friend from the antique shop, turned out to have his own supernatural heritage, a trace of fairy blood that explained his natural ability to find magical artifacts. He became the pack's official consultant for supernatural objects. Elena kept her job at the design company, but she also started a new project, a counseling service for supernatural beings who wanted to integrate into human society. Her unique abilities made her perfect for helping others find balance in their lives. The collar remained part of her, but now it felt like a symbol of choice rather than obligation. It glowed softly during her wedding ceremony, and Elena knew it was reflecting the happiness and contentment she felt. As Elena and Kieran danced at their reception, surrounded by friends from both the human and supernatural worlds, Elena thought about how much her life had changed. A few months ago, She had been an ordinary person with ordinary problems. Now she was part of something magical and meaningful. Any regrets? Kieran asked as they swayed to the music. Elena looked up at him, then around at all the people who had become her extended family. None, she said firmly. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The collar pulsed once with warm light, as if agreeing with her words. And Elena knew that she had finally found her true home.